Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Stormy day in court for Trump yesterday in Manhattan. Here was part of what Harris Faulkner had to say about the salacious testimony of the former actress.
The texture of it about, well, he didn't have on a condom, but in my adult business life, that was always required. I mean, some of the details are beyond salacious. They are pornographic, quite frankly, and that's her specialty. So I would imagine she'd be good at that.
Zing. Well, they're another P word, too. They're prejudicial.
Uh-huh.
And
it is such drama. I mean, from her 2011 interview, it seemed like casual. Everything was fine. Yesterday, when she was up there, I mean, she described this intense encounter and said that the room was spinning in slow motion and blood left her hands and her feet. And she said that Trump did not particularly act threatening, but blocked her access to the door to the bedroom. She says she blacked out, Dan. I mean, come on. She's trying to make him look like a rapist, and it was all lies. And shame on her. And this happened, by the way, in 2006, almost 20 years ago.
Your Honor, I object. Is this a business records case, or is this some other sort of case that we haven't? I mean, since we're always being surprised with charges from the Manhattan DA, maybe this case has taken a turn and this is about a different issue than it was originally scheduled to be.
The testimony was totally irrelevant to providing the underlying charge. And there's so much salacious details that were like conflated and dirty with illegal. You know, it was just a smear job. It was a smear campaign, and I don't even believe her. I mean, she talked like she knew the medicine in his medicine cabinet at the hotel. Was she snooping around?
Senator Slingblade from Pennsylvania is having trouble following it as well. He was on with Brett Baer.
Really?
Well, I mean, like I'm a sitting senator, and I'm truthfully not even exactly sure what his trials are about, how many of them or whatever. I mean, I think it's, you know, most voters in Pennsylvania agrees that it's a very stark choice as well. And so if I'm not following it that closely,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an issue we talked about earlier, that the people who are following it closely, I think, have a pretty good handle on the Star Chamber proceeding that this is in Manhattan. The people that aren't following it closely are going to listen to the verdict and probably make a snap judgment about Trump's guilt or innocence based on the jury's judgment as to his guilt or innocence. And that potentially could be politically problematic. That's I think, still a bit hazy. For more on the legal aspects of what's going on in Manhattan and elsewhere, pleased to be joined again by Professor William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell Law School, founder of LegalInsurrection.com and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation. Professor Jacobson, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump legal team tried for a mistrial per Stormy Daniels's prejudicial testimony, I would argue, and didn't get it. What was your read on how, since he's much in controversy, Judge Merchan handled the testimony that was offered and the objections that were leveled?
Well, I'll start with the caveat that we only know what's reported. This is not live streamed, so we have to rely on what people tell us, and that's always dangerous to do. But the reports seem pretty consistent that she was allowed to go into a fair amount of detail, fair amount about her own mental reaction to things that really have nothing to do with the case. I think that it did seem to suggest that perhaps he's some sort of, sexual perpetrator here when there was no indication it was non-consensual. So why are you getting into this stuff? Why are you allowing her to offer that testimony, which is saying to the jury, hey, convict this guy because he's a sexual predator, even though that has nothing to do with this case and he hasn't been charged with it against me. So I think it's highly prejudicial. If, Trump gets convicted, I think there will be a serious question for appeal why all of this sort of marginal testimony was allowed to come to evidence. Remember, this is a criminal trial. This is not a civil case. So it should be subject to fairly strict review as to what was allowed to come into evidence.
So, but you agree that the judge should have granted a mistrial, right? Or
I think without having sat through it, I'd be hesitant, but he certainly should have cut her off quickly, whether it's a mistrial in the middle of the case, a mistrial at the end of the case, or something for appeal. I just don't have a clear thought right now on that, not having seen it, but I think that it was certainly problematic.
Well, what about, from the reporters that were in the room and in the overflow room, they said that the judge seemed very bothered by her testimony, which the jury saw that. So how is that going to affect them, do you think?
Yeah, we don't know. That's one of the things, this is Manhattan, so you have to assume there are at least some Trump haters on that jury who didn't disclose it during their, voir dire. So I don't know. I think what the prosecution is trying to do is to convict Trump of being Trump. And then, hey, we've got these other charges. We've actually got these criminal charges we're bringing, but it's Trump. And you've heard what a bad guy he is, and you've heard how he treated Stormy Daniels. None of that has to do with whether the business records were falsified. I guess you could make the argument that at least some evidence that they did have a relationship needed to come in because the charges, he was trying to cover that up. But I'm not even sure that's true. I'm not even sure you needed to prove that.
You're convict Trump for being Trump, and he's a bad guy. That's exactly what they're doing, and this is why Trump. I was arguing earlier on the show. This is why Trump and his attorneys need to stay away from the vilification of Stormy Daniels and return the jury's attention to the matter at hand, because you're not going to win the vilification game, not in that courtroom and not with that jury pool, more than likely. I had one question that was brought up by a listener when we discussed this a bit earlier, and I gave my opinion, but yours is a more informed one, so I want to put it to you. In the event that it was a hung jury, what is the likelihood that Bragg, if he wanted to, then it would be a political calculation in terms of deciding whether or not to retry him, but if he wanted to retry Trump, what is the likelihood he could turn it around before November?
I think very slim. They'd have to go through the jury selection process. But if the judge wants to fast track it, you're already prepared for trial. Let's start up next week. That's in theory possible.
Okay. Yeah.
It would be, unlikely, but it's possible.
Possible. I wanted to get your take on something that Mike Davis said the other day. Davis, a former law clerk for Neil Gorsuch and now heads up this Article 3 project organization. He said that he argued that Jim Jordan and the House Weaponization Committee and House Judiciary Committee, the combination of the two, should be right now subpoenaing officials at the Department of Justice, the White House, the Manhattan DA's office, the Fulton County, Jack Smith, everybody involved in the various Trump criminal trials, because he believes there is the possibility of a criminal conspiracy afoot to deprive Trump of his rights under federal statutory law, and there'll be all sorts of resistance and suggestions of executive privilege and so on and so forth. Easy to anticipate, but you should what House Republicans should be doing right now, through the power they have with those committees, is trying to get as many people on the record, as much down in writing, as much information uncovered as possible, because we know of these meetings and conversations and personnel moves that have happened in these various trials.
Well, if they're able to actually gather that, I'm not convinced the Republicans in Congress are capable of doing anything, to tell you the truth. Look at how efficient and effective the Democrats are when they have a House committee investigation. Republicans flounder. Republicans Democrats tell them to pound sand on producing records, and we never hear of it again. Whereas if, where it's a Republican House committee, a Democrat House committee and a Republican refuses records, all of a sudden the person gets prosecuted. So I think good idea. They need to preserve records. They need to do those sort of things before things disappear. But I'm not convinced Republicans in the House have the ability to really do anything.
Do you think it was a good day for Trump yesterday because the criminal classified documents case has been postponed indefinitely?
Yeah, that's the judge scheduled motion hearings into July and said that she was not going to set a new date because there's too many things in flux right now. And so it's the chance of it happening before the election, is slim to none. I won't say none. Anything could happen, but extremely slim that if you're still arguing motions in July, that you're going to have a major criminal trial before November. And I can't imagine that judge, maybe one of the state court judges would do it, but I can't imagine that judge is going to schedule a trial, for 4 weeks before the election,
We haven't talked about your school much with respect to all of the encampments and ugliness on college campuses throughout the Ivy League and across the country, but the Ivy League has been a particular focus thanks to Columbia. Although Harvard has disgraced itself again. What's going on at Cornell?
Well, we do have an encampment. It's been there for a while. I'm not sure how many weeks. It's fairly small. I think they generally have 30 to 50 people there. When they make a call for the crowds to come out, they get a couple of hundred. The administration has suspended 6 students who were involved and has said that they're going to be suspending more, and has referred staff, and they didn't say faculty, they said staff, for HR, has filed HR referrals for some staff members involved. The administration at Cornell, I think, is hoping it will go away. I'm not convinced it will go away. A lot of the people there are graduate students. Graduate student community at Cornell is much more radicalized than the undergrad community, and those grad students are there year-round. They don't leave at the end of the semester. They're PhD students, et cetera. So I'm not sure it's going to go away, but Cornell has not wanted to really get tough with them. I think that it hasn't gotten out of hand the way it has at GW and Columbia. I think the administration's hand would be forced if there was much more aggressive student action at these encampments. As of now, they're just, chanting the usual slogans. There's no solution. There's only one solution, Intifada Revolution. That video circulated not too long ago. But as long as they're just saying offensive things and not, physically harassing people and not physically blocking buildings and taking over buildings, I think the administration is just hoping it goes away. Whether that works or not remains to be seen.
Well, won't they be graduating soon?
Well, not the graduate students.
Oh, that's true. They'll be out.
Yeah, the grad students are there forever. 7 years.
Yeah.
They
9
never
years.
leave.
Yeah, when they turn pro. With the Equal Opportunity Project work that you do, are you taking notice of these negotiations that are occurring in places like Northwestern and University of Chicago, where, for example, at Northwestern, the part of the negotiation for the removal of the encampment was dedicating a certain number of scholarships to Palestinian students and talking about and other demands and considerations have been made for X number of Palestinian professors or some other university resources devoted to Palestinians specifically. Anything that you're hearing that runs afoul of federal law?
Yeah, in fact, Equal Protection Project filed a civil rights complaint with the Department of Education over Northwestern's deal. We filed it 2 days after it was announced, and that is national origin discrimination. It's shared ancestry discrimination, and we think we've got a good claim there. And hopefully the Department of Education will do something, but you can't announce a scholarship as a university that receives federal funding that is reserved for certain ethnicities and certain national origins. And so we think that does run afoul, and we've challenged that. We also challenged, as part of that, the reservation of housing for what they call the MENA, Middle East, North Africa / Muslim students, that also violates the statute, because that was part of the deal, that they're going to reserve certain scholarships in certain place. It was, I think, a free ride scholarship, actually, 4-year tuition free for 7 Palestinian students. And then there was, they were going to create temporary and ultimately permanent housing for MENA / Muslim students. And so that's, segregationist. It violates the law. Probably violates a lot of state laws also. But we filed with the Federal Department of Education, because Northwestern gets federal funds. So, yeah, that's really problematic legally. It's even more problematic that we have an administration at Northwestern and elsewhere which gives in to hostage takers. And what they took hostage was a part of campus. And so we're negotiating and giving in to hostage takers. That's the bigger problem. I mean, the legal problem is significant. Northwestern should be sanctioned because of this. But really, it's just going to encourage more of these things. And it's happened not just at Northwestern. Many places, the administrations are shaking in their boots at these stupid encampments and giving in to the demands, or at least some of the demands.
Professor William Jacobson, clinical professor of law and director of the Securities Law Clinic at Cornell Law, founder of LegalInsurrection.com and president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, as well as the Equal Opportunity Project we were just discussing. Professor Jacobson, thanks as always.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on